If you're anything like me during your childhood, you saw this screen a lot. A little pause and respite from the loud, bombastic spacefaring adventures of each of the planets in the early Ratchet & Clank games. The later entries in the series would remove these cutscenes, but I always missed them. It made the galaxy feel so big. The lack of any music, with just the ship's sounds to keep you company, reminded me that there's still so much more out there. While you get a small piece of it throughout your journey to all the planets you visit, you still feel like there's tons of galaxy left unexplored. The contrast between the quiet journey and the frenetic battles on the planets made me appreciate each of these new missions so much more. But why did they remove them? As I would come to learn as an adult, this cutscene of journeying across space was just hiding a loading screen. That's something that's missing from modern games. With the technological advancement, there's only two limitations when it comes to making games in 2026: time and money. But with the games I had growing up, the developers had to come up with creative workarounds to their technical limitations. As the old saying goes, limitation breeds creativity, and I want to talk about some of my favorite examples of this. The most famous example, and the one that probably jumped to your mind, was the fog from Silent Hill. The PlayStation 1, which the original Silent Hill was released on, was the generation of consoles that shifted gaming away from 2D into 3D. But this was early 3D. Things were blocky, and developers were still figuring out how to optimize these tools. 3D was possible, but it was resource intensive. Developers solved this in different ways. Resident Evil, for example, used a fixed camera angle to have pre-rendered 2D backgrounds for you to traverse in. But Silent Hill was able to use full 3D environments by reducing your vision with the iconic fog. Having reduced visibility in a psychological horror game fostered that fear of the unknown. You can't see what's ahead of you, and anything could be lurking amongst that fog. That's not to say that its sequel, Silent Hill 2, didn't have its own set of tricks. Even though there's a generation between them, there's still a long way to go before those technical limitations are removed. Fixed cameras are an indication of that era, because games won't fully progress to the over-the-shoulder chase-style camera until and after the release of Resident Evil 4. Silent Hill 2's camera, while sometimes following directly behind James, will switch to more cinematic angles. Like in the opening descent throughout the forest, or in the heat of combat, it'll be incredibly unreliable. For me, that enhances the horror. It gives a cold sense of detachment to James, and creates separation between him as a character and us as the player. The camera being difficult to whip into place while you're in one of the many hallways you explore creates an extra sense of tension because you're not only fighting the monsters for your survival, but also the tools you have to fight them. It would be remiss of me to not also mention the original Resident Evil as well. Like I said, they used a fixed camera angle to be able to show the manor fully, and they got to do a lot of smart tricks with that. There were blind spots because of the way that the camera was set up, and the most famous of which comes from the GameCube remake, with this massive spider descending into frame. But another limitation of the time was the loading screens between the rooms of the manor. To cover those loading screens, they used the door opening animation, which has since become incredibly iconic. Breaking up the tension like that gives a level of anticipation. What could be behind that door? What horrors await me on the other side? Well, you'll just have to wait to find out. Hey, thanks for watching the video. I'd really appreciate it if you could also subscribe to my channel. I put a lot of work into these videos, and I'd like that to get recognized. Also, I made a 5-part comedy crime miniseries called Midlands Mayhem, which you can check out for free right now on midlandsmayhem.com. Anyway, back to the video. Developers often had to find workarounds for loading screens, and there's many examples across gaming history. But here are some of my favorites. The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker hid its loading screens across the open ocean. It gave the adventure a seafaring slant, and made the world feel so big. Mass Effect is famous for its elevators in the first game that hid a loading screen. While the later games would replace them with the conventional method and would make jokes at its expense, we did lose the character building conversations that would happen while we waited for our destination. Finally, Metroid Prime hid its loading screens behind beam-activated doors. I always found that these doors communicated an ancient sci-fi civilization that was lost, like in the case of the Chozo in Metroid Prime 1. It also kept the same design principles of the room-to-room exploration the earlier Metroids had. Flipping back to the arcade classic of Space Invaders, these games didn't have much story to communicate, but Space Invaders did a lot with a little. As you destroy the alien ships and you progress throughout the game, the enemies speed up. With the technical limitations of the time, the game had extreme difficulty keeping up with all the sprites that were on screen. But as you eliminated them, it gained back some of that power, allowing the aliens to be sped up. Not only did this create a dynamic difficulty scaling, but it also gave the aliens a personality. As their numbers dwindle, they get more frantic, dramatically speeding up to reach you, the player. This, as a limitation, made the whole game. Jumping forward to a recent release in the context of this topic, Breath of the Wild had this unique mechanic called a blood moon. Every 7 in-game days, or just under every 3 hours of continuous playtime, at midnight, a blood moon will strike. This will revive all enemies, weapons, cooking materials, etc. But what it's really doing behind the scenes is dumping the in-game memory. It will require a lot of processing power to hold all that information of what you've done across the whole map, and the blood moon is the way to reset this. Its inclusion, however, showed Ganon's magic warp the world of Hyrule. It showed his control over the surrounding lands and how he's corrupted all the creatures within. Similarly, there's a panic blood moon, which occurs when you've loaded in too many items before you've reached the scheduled blood moon. Naturally, this is a way for the game preventing itself from crashing, but it breaks up the rhythm and the familiarity of the blood moon, making it feel like, even though Ganon is tucked away in his castle, he can still sense what you're doing. The Lavender Town theme is one of the most iconic themes across all of Pokemon, and is often used as a backing track for horror-related content. It's one of the creepiest themes composed, and really sells you on the vibe of a ghost town, especially because that town will be your first encounter with ghost-type Pokemon. But hold on, listen to the version that they composed for the Let's Go games. It feels more sad. That, I believe, was the original intention. A melancholy town with people mourning over the loss of their Pokemon. But because of the Game Boy's limited sound technology, it was pushed into a creepy, unnerving vibe, which spawned thousands of theories and showed the darker side of Pokemon. Sticking with the sound, the SNES had very limited audio memory. 64 kilobytes of audio RAM to be precise. Super Metroid could only store a small set of samples in the game, and had to reuse those for everything. Music, monsters, ambience, you name it. It all came from those sets of samples. But because of that, there was an unconscious connection between everything that you couldn't quite put your finger on. It gave your enemies a more synthetic feel, which would tie into the themes of Super Metroid, with the genetically modified space pirates, and well, Metroids. I'm sure many of you remember the crash landing from the second level of Halo Combat Evolved. Your entire squad is wiped out, and it's just you as Master Chief left to fend for yourself on an alien planet. Well, there's a reason behind that. Bungie couldn't figure out how to get the Marines to cross the first bridge you travel over. The solution they came up with was to kill them. Consequently, it played into the feeling of being alone and isolated on a brand new world, and it made the view of the Halo ring so much more atmospheric. It also built Master Chief as a character. He's a badass super soldier, and he's more than capable of handling this mission all by himself. The original Fallout used a system called palette indexed graphics. This essentially meant that there were a limited range of color options you could choose from for better compression. You had to assign colors to the limited palette, and in the case of Fallout, they hadn't used blue or yellow yet, and those colors were on the verge of deletion. To find a place for them, they were used for the iconic jumpsuits, which is a color scheme they're still using in the most recent Fallout outings. But because those colors weren't being used anywhere else, it gave a clear separation between life in the vault and the outside world. The colorfulness of the suits contrasted with the desolate outside world, and really shows how privileged your life was before stepping foot into the wasteland. There's many examples I didn't get to touch on in this video, like how Rayman's original limbless design, and therefore his abilities, are a consequence of technical limitations of the time. An iconic design was born because the developers had to work around the tech of the time. This is something we've lost in gaming. Now that tech is so evolved, we can do anything our heart desires. Having unlimited options is great, but we lost something without these limitations to work around.